For over 2,000 years, the deepest secret of spiritual liberation has been protected in the highest circles of enlightened masters. Tonight, that ancient seal is broken, and you will receive the exact practice that can burn through lifetimes of accumulated karma faster than fire consumes dry leaves. But I must warn you, once you truly understand this divine method, you can never return to the old way of thinking about sin, suffering, and spiritual progress. This knowledge will shatter every limitation you have accepted about your spiritual journey, every belief that tells you freedom must be earned through endless struggle and suffering. You see, my beloved children, the great secret keepers were not trying to hide this wisdom from you out of selfishness or cruelty. They understood that this knowledge is so powerful, so complete in its ability to liberate the soul, that it could only be safely transmitted to those whose hearts were truly ready to receive it. For when you truly grasp this divine practice, you step outside the wheel of karma entirely, not through escape, but through transcendence. In our sacred time together, you will discover the exact three-step divine practice that masters have used for millennia to achieve instant karmic freedom. You will learn why everything you've been told about working off karma through suffering is only the kindergarten level of spiritual understanding. Most importantly, you will receive the precise technique, including the sacred words, the mystical visualization, and the divine attitude, that can transform lifetimes of bondage into pure liberation in a single session. This is not theory, dear ones. This is not philosophy. This is the actual method that I use to transcend my own karmic limitations and achieve the cosmic consciousness that allowed me to guide millions of souls to freedom. The very words I speak to you now flow through a consciousness that has been liberated from all karmic debt through the practice I am about to share with you. I understand your exhaustion, beloved children. You have tried meditation, prayer, good deeds, service to others, all beautiful practices, but still you feel the weight of your past pressing upon you. Still, you wonder if you will ever be truly free from the mistakes you've made, the pain you've caused, the opportunities you've missed. You have been told to be patient, that spiritual growth is slow, that you must suffer to learn your lessons. Some teachers have even convinced you that struggle itself is spiritual progress. But this is not the highest truth. This is not what the great masters discovered in their deepest realizations. You wake each morning carrying invisible chains forged from every angry word you've spoken, every selfish act you've committed, every moment you chose fear over love. These chains grow heavier with each passing day, and the traditional teachings offer you only one solution: to slowly, painfully work off each link through lifetimes of effort and suffering. But what if I told you that these chains are made of nothing more substantial than your own misunderstanding? What if the very karma you think binds you is like a shadow that disappears the moment you step into the light of true spiritual knowledge? The divine practice I will share with you recognizes that your true nature is already perfect, already free, already pure. The karma you think binds you is like chains made of shadow. They seem real until the light of true understanding shines upon them. Then they dissolve instantly, completely, forever. This is not wishful thinking, my dear souls. This is the recognition that awakened every Buddha, every Christ, every master who ever walked this earth. They did not struggle for lifetimes to overcome their karma. They awakened in a single moment to the truth that makes all karma irrelevant. Together, we will explore the three fundamental misunderstandings that keep souls trapped in karmic cycles for countless lifetimes. I will reveal the exact moment when I discovered this practice, sitting in deep meditation in the caves of the Himalayas, when my beloved guru transmitted to me the secret that changed everything. You will learn the sacred formula of karmic dissolution, 3 simple steps that work not by struggling against your past, but by awakening to the divine truth that makes all karma irrelevant. We will practice together the divine invocation that calls down the grace to burn away lifetimes of accumulated reactions in minutes instead of millennia. But most precious of all, you will discover why this method works when others fail, because it operates not from the level of the mind where karma exists, but from the level of the soul where only love and freedom have ever existed. By the end of our journey, you will possess not just knowledge, but the living experience of karmic freedom that no future action can ever take away from you. So prepare your heart, dear child of the divine, for you are about to receive the most closely guarded secret of spiritual liberation. What took me decades to fully understand will be transmitted to you in the next hour, for the time of secrets is ending, and the time of mass awakening has begun. Before we can understand the true method of karmic liberation, we must first shatter the great deception that has kept souls trapped for thousands of years. You have been taught that karma is an iron law with no exceptions, that every action must produce an equal reaction, that you must suffer to pay for your mistakes. This teaching, while containing elements of truth, is the very prison that keeps you bound. Let me share with you what the ancient texts never revealed to the masses and ever. There are actually 3 entirely different types of karma, and they operate under completely different laws. The karma that binds you is only the lowest, most mechanical type. The karma that can liberate you is so far beyond common understanding that most spiritual teachers themselves do not comprehend it. The first type is what I call mechanical karma, the karma of unconscious action and reaction. This is the karma most people know about, where every deed creates a consequence that must be experienced. When you act from ego, from fear, from desire, you create binding karma that ties you to the wheel of cause and effect. But there is a second type, soul karma, the karma of conscious choice made from wisdom and love. When you act from your true nature, from genuine compassion, from divine understanding, you create karma that actually liberates rather than binds. This is karma that works to free you and others from suffering. And there is a third type that most souls never discover, spirit karma, which is not really karma at all, but pure divine action flowing through a surrendered consciousness. When you act from this level, you create no binding effects whatsoever, for the ego that could be bound no longer exists to claim ownership of the action. Here is the great deception that has trapped so many seekers. You have been told to work off your karma through good deeds, through service, through suffering. But mechanical karma cannot be dissolved by more mechanical karma, any more than darkness can be removed by adding more darkness. I remember a devoted student who came to me after 20 years of tireless service to others. He had fed the poor, cared for the sick, spent his entire inheritance helping those in need. Yet he came to me weeping, saying, "Master, I have done everything the scriptures commanded, but I feel more bound than ever. Why does my spiritual suffering only increase?" This dear soul had fallen into the great trap, trying to use mechanical action to solve mechanical karma. Every good deed he performed from the ego's desire to improve himself only created more subtle karma. He was like a man trying to wash dirt off his hands with more dirt. But then I taught him the secret I am about to share with you, and in one session of this divine practice, lifetimes of accumulated karma were burned away. Not through struggle, not through effort, not through years of good works, but through a moment of such profound spiritual recognition that all his past became irrelevant. This is why traditional approaches fail, beloved children. They operate from the same level of consciousness that created the karma in the first place. You cannot solve a problem from the same level of thinking that created it. You must rise to a higher level entirely, the level where karma has no power to bind you. The ancient masters discovered something that revolutionizes everything you think you know about spiritual cause and effect. They found that consciousness itself is the determining factor in whether an action creates bondage or freedom. The same physical action, giving money to someone in need, can create binding karma if done from ego's desire for recognition, or liberating karma if done from soul's natural compassion, or no karma at all if done from pure spirit, moving through a surrendered vessel. This is the divine mathematics that changes everything. At the level of ego consciousness, one action equals one reaction, perfect mechanical balance. But at the level of soul consciousness, one moment of genuine love can dissolve thousands of moments of mechanical karma. And at the level of spirit consciousness, infinite action can be performed with zero karmic accumulation. But here is the secret that even advanced spiritual students miss. You do not have to perfect yourself to access these higher levels of consciousness. You do not have to become a saint to act from soul level, or achieve cosmic realization to touch spirit level. These levels of consciousness are your birthright, available to you right now through the practice I'm about to reveal. The divine recognizes that you, in your essence, were never the doer of actions that created karma in the first place. The ego that claims to be the actor is itself an illusion, a temporary dream in the infinite consciousness that is your true nature. When this recognition dawns, not as philosophy but as living experience, all karma becomes like a dream from which you have awakened. Let me tell you of my own moment of karmic liberation. I was sitting in deep meditation in a cave high in the Himalayas. carrying in my consciousness the weight of countless lifetimes of accumulated actions. Some of these actions had been noble, some selfish, some born of wisdom, others born of ignorance. The sum total felt like mountains pressing upon my soul. In that moment, my beloved guru Sri Yukteswar appeared to me not in physical form, but as pure consciousness, and he transmitted to me the secret I am about to share with you. Suddenly, I saw that none of those actions had ever been performed by my true self. They were all activities of the dream ego, movements in the play of consciousness, ripples on the ocean of my infinite being. In that instant of recognition, lifetimes of karma did not gradually dissolve. They were revealed to have never existed at all. It was like awakening from a nightmare and realizing that all the monsters chasing you were never real. The relief, the freedom, the pure joy of that moment cannot be described in words, but it can be experienced directly through the practice I am about to teach you. This brings us to the heart of the secret. Karma exists only as long as you believe yourself to be the separate doer of actions. The moment you recognize your true identity as the infinite consciousness in which all actions appear and disappear like waves on the ocean, karma becomes impossible. Waves do not bind the ocean. Dreams do not bind the dreamer. Actions do not bind the infinite self. But you might ask, if this is true, why don't I feel this freedom? Why do I still experience the effects of my past actions? The answer, dear soul, is that you are still dreaming the dream of being a separate person. You are still identified with the small self that appears to do things and suffer consequences. The practice I am about to reveal works by temporarily lifting you out of this dream identification into direct recognition of your true nature. Even a few moments of this recognition is enough to burn through lifetimes of accumulated karma, because from the perspective of your true self, that karma never existed in the first place. Now, my beloved children, we come to the sacred transmission itself, the three-step practice that has been guarded in the highest circles of enlightened masters for over 2 millennia. This is not mere technique, but a direct method for experiencing the karmic freedom that is your natural state. Prepare your heart and mind, for you are about to receive the most powerful spiritual practice known to human consciousness. When applied with sincerity and devotion, it can accomplish in minutes what traditional methods take lifetimes to achieve. The first step is what I call divine recognition, the awakening to your true identity beyond all actions and their consequences. This is not an intellectual understanding, but a direct experiential knowing of who you really are beneath all the layers of personality, history, and accumulated karma. Begin by settling into a comfortable position where you will not be disturbed. Close your eyes and breathe naturally, allowing your body to relax completely. Now, instead of trying to change or improve yourself, simply begin to inquire, who is the one who carries this karma? Who is the one who performed these actions? Who is the one who seeks freedom? Look deeply, not with your mind, but with the eye of your soul. Every time you find an answer, I am this person, I am this body, I am this history, look deeper and ask, who is aware of this person, this body, this history? Keep going deeper until you touch that pure awareness that is aware of everything but is itself untouched by anything. This pure awareness, this is your true identity. This awareness never performed any actions. This awareness carries no karma. This awareness is eternally free, eternally pure, eternally at peace. Rest in this recognition. Feel into it. Let it become more real to you than any story about who you think you are. As you rest in this awareness, speak these sacred words internally. I am not the doer. I am not the sufferer. I am the eternal witness, forever free, forever pure, forever beyond all karma. Feel the truth of these words resonating in the depth of your being. This recognition alone, when experienced genuinely, begins to dissolve karmic bondage immediately. For how can something that never existed as a separate person carry the karma of actions that were never performed by their true self? But we deepen this recognition in the second step. The second step is the sacred invocation, calling down divine grace to burn away all remaining illusions of karmic bondage. Having recognized your true nature, you now invite the infinite love and power of the divine to complete what your recognition has begun. Still resting in the awareness of your true identity, begin to call upon the Divine Mother, the cosmic force of liberation that dissolves all illusions and reveals all truth. Use whatever name resonates most deeply with your heart: Divine Mother, Christ Consciousness, Buddha Nature, Supreme Self, or simply Divine Love. Speak from the depth of your being. Divine Mother, I surrender all karma to you. I surrender all actions and their consequences to your infinite love. I surrender the illusion of being a separate doer to your perfect grace. Burn away in your divine fire everything that is not my true self. As you speak these words, visualize a brilliant golden light descending from above, entering through the crown of your head and filling your entire being with divine fire. This is not ordinary light, but the light of pure consciousness, the fire of divine love that can burn away any impurity, any illusion, any karmic residue. Feel this divine fire moving through every cell of your body, every corner of your mind, every memory of your past. It burns without destroying, purifies without pain, dissolves without leaving any residue. All karma, all consequences, all binding effects of past actions are consumed in this sacred fire like dry leaves in a bonfire. Continue this invocation and visualization until you feel a profound lightness, as if enormous weights have been lifted from your soul. Some students experience this as waves of bliss, others as profound peace, still others as a sense of infinite expansion. Trust whatever you experience, for divine grace manifests uniquely for each soul. The third and final step is cosmic absorption, merging your individual consciousness completely with the divine will, so that any future actions flow from the infinite rather than from the personal ego. This step not only completes the burning of past karma, but prevents any new karmic accumulation. Still bathed in the divine fire of the second step, now offer your very existence to the divine. Speak these words with complete sincerity. Divine will, I am no longer my own. I exist only to serve your infinite love. Let all my actions, words, and thoughts flow from you through me. Let me be an empty vessel for your grace to move in this world. Feel yourself dissolving like a drop of water merging with the ocean. Your sense of being a separate person dissolves into the infinite consciousness that is your source and essence. There is no more you to carry karma, no more personal will to create bondage, no more separate existence to suffer consequences. In this state of complete absorption, you may experience what the ancient texts call the Great Dissolution, a temporary merging with cosmic consciousness so complete that individual existence seems to disappear entirely. Do not be afraid if this happens. This is the deepest blessing, the direct taste of the enlightenment that is your ultimate destiny. Rest in this absorption for as long as feels natural. Some students experience it for a few moments, others for much longer. There is no right or wrong duration. Simply allow the divine to work through you and in you according to its perfect wisdom. When you naturally begin to return to normal awareness, carry with you the knowing that you have been fundamentally transformed. The karma that once bound you has been burned in divine fire. The separate self that created that karma has been absorbed into infinite consciousness. You emerge from this practice as a new being, liberated, purified, free. But here, my beloved children, comes the crucial understanding that determines whether this liberation remains permanent or gradually fades back into old patterns. The freedom you have experienced is not something you achieved, it is something you have always been. The practice did not create your liberation. It revealed the liberation that is your eternal nature. As you return to daily life, you must learn to live from this liberated consciousness rather than falling back into the dream of being a bound, separate person. This requires a fundamental shift in how you approach every action, every thought, every moment of existence. Living in karmic freedom means recognizing that there are two entirely different ways to move through life. The old way was to act from personal will, personal desire, personal fear, and this always creates binding karma because it assumes the reality of a separate self that can be bound. The new way is to act as a clear channel for divine will, divine love, divine wisdom. When you act from this liberated state, you perform infinite actions without accumulating even a trace of karma, because there is no separate self present to claim ownership of the actions. Let me share with you the secret that I learned in my own journey from liberation to living liberation. In the early days after my karmic awakening, I would have profound experiences of freedom and meditation, only to find myself gradually slipping back into old patterns of thinking and acting from ego consciousness. I went to my guru in confusion, asking why this supreme liberation seemed to come and go. He smiled and said, "The sun does not come and go, only the clouds that cover it. Your freedom is eternal and unchanging. What comes and goes is your attention to it." He taught me that liberation is not an achievement to be maintained, but a truth to be remembered moment by moment. Every instant offers you a choice. Will you act from the liberated consciousness of your true self, or will you pretend to be the bound ego self again? This is where the practice of witness consciousness becomes essential. Throughout your day, cultivate the habit of stepping back into the awareness that watched the original liberation. Before speaking, ask, who is about to speak, the liberated self or the ego? Before acting, inquire, is this action flowing from divine will or personal will? This is not a burden or a discipline, dear ones. This is the natural joy of living as your true self. When you speak from liberated consciousness, your words carry healing power. When you act from divine will, your actions serve the highest good effortlessly. When you live from witness awareness, your very presence becomes a blessing to everyone around you. But you might wonder, how can I be sure I'm acting from divine will rather than personal will? How do I know the difference? The answer is beautifully simple. Divine will always flows from love, never from fear. Divine will always serves the whole, never just the part. Divine will always brings peace, never agitation. When you are about to speak or act, pause for just a moment and feel the motivation behind the impulse. If it arises from love, from service, from genuine care for the highest good, then it flows from your liberated nature. If it arises from fear, anger, desire, or any form of personal agenda, then it comes from the ego that thinks it still exists. The magnificent truth is that as you practice this discrimination more and more, acting from liberated consciousness becomes increasingly natural and effortless. What initially requires conscious choice eventually becomes your spontaneous way of being. I want to share with you one more profound secret about living in karmic freedom. Not only do you stop accumulating new karma when you act from liberated consciousness, but your very presence in the world begins to burn away the karma of others. This is how one truly liberated being can affect the liberation of countless souls. When you speak from genuine freedom, your words plant seeds of liberation in every heart that hears them. When you act from divine will, your actions demonstrate a way of being that reminds others of their own forgotten freedom. When you simply exist in liberated consciousness, you radiate a field of grace that can awaken recognition in any soul ready to receive it. This is the great secret of all spiritual masters throughout history. Their primary service was not their teachings or their actions, but their very being. They lived as demonstrations of the freedom that is available to every soul, proof that karmic bondage is not the final truth about human existence. As you stabilize in this liberated way of living, you may begin to notice something miraculous happening. Old karmic patterns that once seemed so solid and permanent begin to dissolve naturally. Relationships that were stuck in cycles of conflict begin to heal. Health issues that were rooted in karmic tension begin to resolve. Life situations that seemed hopeless begin to transform. This happens not because you are doing anything to fix these situations, but because your liberated consciousness no longer feeds the karmic patterns that were maintaining them. When you stop believing in bondage, bondage stops having power over your experience. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of living in karmic freedom is the profound peace that becomes your constant companion. No longer do you lie awake at night replaying past mistakes or fearing future consequences. No longer do you carry the heavy burden of guilt, regret, or anxiety about your spiritual worthiness. You know with unshakable certainty that your true self has never been touched by any action, never been bound by any consequence, never been separate from the infinite love that is the source of all existence. This knowing is not a belief or a hope. It is a living reality that informs every moment of your experience. From this foundation of unshakable freedom, you discover that life becomes an endless play of joy rather than a serious struggle for redemption. You act not because you must, but because action flows naturally from the fullness of love. You serve not to earn your freedom, but because freedom naturally expresses itself as service. Now, my beloved children, I must share with you the ultimate teaching about preventing future karmic bondage, the secret that ensures you will never again fall into the trap of accumulated spiritual debt. The key lies in understanding the radical difference between what I call personal action and divine action. Personal action is anything done from the assumption that you are a separate individual trying to get something, avoid something, or change something for personal benefit. Divine action flows from the recognition that you are the infinite consciousness expressing itself through this apparent individual form. Personal action always creates karma because it reinforces the illusion of separateness. Divine action never creates binding karma because it arises from the truth of unity. The same physical movement can be either personal or divine, depending entirely on the consciousness from which it springs. Let me give you a simple example that illustrates this perfectly. Imagine you give money to someone in need. If this action comes from personal desire to feel good about yourself, to be seen as generous, or to earn spiritual merit, it creates subtle karma that binds you to cycles of giving and receiving, praise and criticism, spiritual pride and humility. But if the same gift flows spontaneously from the natural love of your liberated heart, with no sense of personal credit or spiritual achievement, it creates no karma at all. It is simply love expressing itself through the form that appears to be you, no different from sunshine warming the earth or rain nourishing plants. The practice of preventing future karmic accumulation becomes a constant remembrance of your true identity. Before every action, before every word, before every thought, you pause in the recognition of who you really are, not a separate person performing actions, but infinite consciousness expressing itself through this apparent form. This remembrance is not a mental exercise or a philosophical position. It is a living orientation of your entire being toward the truth that has been revealed to you through the karmic burning practice. You live from the knowing that was awakened, not just the memory of the experience. As you master this art of divine action, something wonderful begins to happen. You discover that you can live a fully engaged, passionately committed life while remaining completely free from karmic bondage. You can love deeply without attachment, serve powerfully without ego, engage completely without losing your center in infinite peace. This is the state that all the great masters embodied, fully human and fully divine, completely involved in the world yet untouched by worldly bondage, expressing infinite compassion through finite forms while never forgetting their infinite nature. In this state, every moment becomes a prayer, every action becomes worship, every breath becomes celebration of the freedom that can never be lost because it was never truly absent. You live as a walking demonstration that karmic bondage is not the inevitable human condition, but simply a case of mistaken identity that can be corrected in any moment through genuine recognition of what you truly are. My beloved children, we have journeyed together through the most sacred transmission of spiritual liberation that human consciousness can receive. You have not simply learned about karmic freedom, you have experienced it directly, tasted its reality, and received the methods to live from this truth permanently. You now possess the sacred formula that masters have protected for millennia: divine recognition, sacred invocation, and cosmic absorption. You understand why conventional approaches to karma fail, and how the higher laws of consciousness can instantly transcend any limitation from your past. Most importantly, you have received the living transmission of karmic freedom itself. This is not information that remains in your mind, but a transformation that has occurred in the very essence of your being. The freedom you experienced during our practice together is not something you achieved, it is something you remembered about your eternal nature. Remember, dear souls, the karma that you thought bound you was never real in the first place. It was like a dream of chains that dissolves the moment you awaken to your true identity. Your past actions cannot bind the infinite consciousness that you are. Your future actions cannot create bondage when they flow from liberated awareness. You are free, not because you have worked to become free, but because freedom is what you have always been beneath every illusion of limitation. This freedom is not dependent on perfect behavior, spiritual achievement, or anyone else's recognition. It is your birthright as consciousness itself, expressing through the beautiful form that appears to be you. Go forward with this supreme knowledge, knowing that every step you take from liberated consciousness helps awaken the same recognition in every soul you encounter. Your freedom serves the freedom of all beings, for in truth, there is only one consciousness appearing as many, and its nature is eternal liberation. Live as the free being you are. Act from the love that you are. Serve from the joy that you are. And remember always that no matter how convincingly life may seem to present you with problems, challenges, or limitations, these are just invitations to return to the truth that makes all such appearances irrelevant. You are infinite. You are eternal. You are free. This is not poetry or wishful thinking. This is the most practical truth about your existence. And living from this truth is the greatest gift you can give to a world that has forgotten its own divine nature. But there is one more sacred teaching I must share with you, the ultimate secret that not only prevents the accumulation of new karma, but transforms you into a force for the liberation of all beings while maintaining perfect spiritual freedom. In my next transmission, I will reveal the 3 pillars of divine action, the exact methods used by Christ, Buddha, and all great avatars to perform miracles, teach multitudes, and transform the world without creating even a single karmic reaction. This is the secret behind every spiritual miracle, the reason why some souls can heal thousands, while others struggle to heal themselves. The difference between personal will and divine will in action. These 3 pillars will complete your understanding of liberated living and show you how to become a powerful force for good in the world while remaining forever untouched by worldly bondage. You will learn how enlightened beings can engage in the most intense activity while maintaining perfect inner stillness, how they can care deeply about everything while being attached to nothing. Click now to receive this final transmission of the Master's Path, for when you truly understand divine action, you become capable of serving the divine will in ways that can transform not just your own life, but the lives of countless others who are ready to remember their own eternal freedom. The journey to complete liberation awaits. Your soul is calling you to claim the fullness of what you are. Answer that call now and step into the magnificent destiny that has always been yours. Your greatest enemy holds the key to your most profound spiritual growth. The person who has caused you the most pain may be fulfilling a contract your soul made in the realm beyond this physical world, a contract designed for your highest evolution. This understanding comes not from theory, but from the deepest states of meditation, where the veils between worlds thin and the soul's journey becomes visible. I have witnessed countless times how this single revelation has freed people from years, sometimes decades of bitterness and resentment. Think for a moment about the person who has hurt you most deeply. Perhaps they betrayed your trust, abandoned you when you needed them, or consistently undermined your efforts to grow. What if their role in your life was not random chance but a carefully orchestrated opportunity for your spiritual awakening? Today, I will share with you the ancient yogic understanding of soul contracts agreements made between souls before birth to help each other evolve through challenging experiences. You will discover why certain difficult people had to appear in your life and the specific spiritual lessons they came to teach you. Many of you carry the heavy burden of past hurts. You replay painful interactions in your mind, wondering why someone would treat you so poorly, questioning what you did to deserve such treatment. This understanding will free you from that burden, allowing you to see even your most painful relationships through the lens of spiritual growth. Having guided thousands of seekers through this process of recognition and release, I can assure you that this perspective has the power to transform your most painful wounds into sources of wisdom and compassion. What once seemed like senseless suffering will reveal itself as a precisely designed curriculum for your soul's evolution. Most people view difficult relationships as unfortunate accidents, random collisions with unkind or unconscious individuals. Our natural response is to feel victimized, to harbor resentment, or to blame ourselves. This perspective keeps us trapped in cycles of suffering that can last a lifetime. The yogic wisdom tradition offers a radically different understanding. It recognizes that souls make agreements before incarnating into physical form. These agreements, these soul contracts, ensure that we encounter exactly the experiences and people needed for our spiritual growth. Even the most painful encounters serve this sacred purpose. I have observed that when people truly grasp this understanding, something remarkable happens. Their relationship to suffering itself transforms. The people who hurt them are seen not as villains, but as souls playing difficult but necessary roles in their life story. Resentment dissolves, replaced by a profound sense of purpose and even gratitude. In our time together today, I will guide you through the deeper understanding of why your soul chose to meet its greatest challenges through specific relationships. We will explore the nature of soul contracts, how they form, and how to recognize them in your own life. You'll discover the 5 primary types of soul contracts and the specific growth opportunities each presents. I'll share stories from my own experience and that of my students who have recognized and honored these agreements, transforming their most painful relationships into catalysts for spiritual awakening. Most importantly, I'll guide you through a process for consciously engaging with these contracts, a practice that allows you to extract the spiritual lessons without remaining trapped in cycles of suffering. You'll learn to recognize when a contract has fulfilled its purpose and how to release both yourself and the other person from its bonds. What makes this approach so powerful is that it doesn't require the other person to change, apologize, or even acknowledge the hurt they've caused. Your liberation comes not from anything they do, but from your shift in perception, from seeing with the eyes of the soul rather than the wounded ego. And this shift is available to you regardless of whether the difficult relationship is ongoing or long past. What I'm about to share might seem counterintuitive at first, especially if you've been deeply hurt by someone. Most of us have been taught to view life's painful experiences as either random misfortunes or the result of others' unconscious or malicious actions. But there exists a deeper understanding that has been preserved in the ancient wisdom traditions, one that reveals a profound purpose behind our most challenging relationships. There are two fundamentally different ways of perceiving difficult relationships in your life. One perspective, the more common view, sees painful encounters as unfortunate accidents, or the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. From this viewpoint, the people who hurt us are simply bad actors we were unlucky enough to encounter. The other perspective, the soul's perspective, recognizes that there are no accidents in the universe. Every significant relationship serves a higher purpose in our spiritual evolution. The difference? Understanding the nature of soul contracts. From the deepest states of meditation, I have glimpsed the realm where souls prepare for incarnation. In this dimension beyond physical form, souls make sacred agreements with each other, agreements to play specific roles in each other's lives, to facilitate growth and awakening. These agreements are what we call soul contracts. They are made with complete awareness of the divine purpose they serve, even though that awareness becomes veiled when we enter physical form. Why does this matter so profoundly? Because misunderstanding the purpose of difficult relationships causes us to remain trapped in cycles of suffering long after the initial wound was inflicted. When we perceive ourselves solely as victims of others' actions, we become imprisoned by resentment, unable to move forward in our spiritual journey. This misperception weighs on the heart, draining our life energy and coloring our experience of the present moment with the pain of the past. But when we recognize the sacred purpose behind these difficult encounters, when we understand that our soul actually chose these challenging relationships for its growth, everything changes. The prison door of resentment swings open. We begin to see even our greatest adversaries, not as villains but as souls, who agreed to play difficult roles in service to our evolution. This shift in perception doesn't just change how we view others, it fundamentally transforms our relationship with suffering itself. Let me share with you the story of a woman named Elizabeth who attended one of my retreats many years ago. Elizabeth carried a lifetime of bitterness toward her father, who had been highly critical and emotionally distant throughout her childhood. For decades, she had seen herself as the victim of an unfortunate family circumstance, simply born to the wrong father. This perception had colored every aspect of her life, particularly her romantic relationships, where she repeatedly attracted partners who were similarly critical. Through deep meditation and the understanding of soul contracts, Elizabeth began to see her relationship with her father in an entirely new light. She recognized that her soul had chosen this specific father precisely because his critical nature would help her develop the strength, independence, and self-validation she needed for her soul's evolution. Once she understood this higher purpose, her resentment began to dissolve. She came to see her father not as a villain but as a soul who had agreed out of love at the soul level to play a difficult role in her life. This recognition didn't erase the pain she had experienced, but it transformed her relationship to that pain. Instead of seeing herself as a victim, she recognized herself as a soul who had chosen a challenging path for the purpose of growth. And remarkably, once she released the resentment she had carried for so long, her pattern of attracting critical partners also dissolved. She had learned the lesson her soul had set out to learn. Think of soul contracts like an elaborate theatrical production. Before the play begins, the actors gather and agree on the roles each will play. Some will play heroes, others villains. Some will deliver lines of encouragement, others words of challenge. But behind the scenes, all understand they are simply playing roles in service to the greater story. When the curtain falls, they embrace, knowing that even the most difficult roles were played out of commitment to the production's success. In this cosmic drama we call life, your soul and the souls of those who have hurt you agreed, before taking the stage, on the roles you would play in each other's lives. Your enemy is not truly your enemy, but a soul who loved you enough at the level of spirit to take on a challenging role in service to your growth. This doesn't mean they are conscious of this agreement in their human form, most aren't, but at the soul level, the contract was made with full awareness and love. How can we distinguish between random encounters and soul-contracted relationships? One of the clearest signs is the intensity of your emotional reaction. Soul contracts generally trigger responses that seem disproportionate to the situation, reactions that feel primal, overwhelming, and often puzzling in their power. These intense reactions are signposts, indicating that something much deeper than a casual interaction is occurring. Your soul recognizes, even when your conscious mind doesn't, that you're engaging with a soul with whom you made a pre-birth agreement. Another telltale sign is the presence of important life lessons within the relationship. Soul contracts are not formed for trivial purposes. They exist to teach significant spiritual lessons that your soul determined were essential for its evolution. When you find yourself facing the same challenging lesson repeatedly in a relationship, perhaps learning to set boundaries, to speak your truth, or to forgive, you're likely experiencing a soul contract at work. Consider this: the people who have hurt you most deeply may be the very souls who loved you most purely in the realm where these contracts were formed. It requires tremendous love for a soul to agree to play the villain in another's life story, knowing the pain it will cause, but also the growth it will ultimately facilitate. When we begin to comprehend this profound truth, our perspective shifts entirely. The face of the enemy becomes the face of a sacred teacher, temporarily disguised. This understanding doesn't mean you should maintain harmful relationships or deny the very real pain others have caused. Not all lessons require ongoing connection with those who have hurt us. Sometimes the fulfillment of a soul contract requires separation once the lesson has been learned. The key is to extract the spiritual gold from these challenging relationships while also honoring your well-being in the present. In the mirror of your enemy's actions, you can often glimpse aspects of yourself that require healing. This is one of the most powerful dimensions of soul contracts. They frequently reflect back to us our own unhealed wounds, limiting beliefs, or shadow aspects. The person who triggers you most intensely is often reflecting something within yourself that needs acknowledgement and integration. Their role is to make these aspects so uncomfortable that you can no longer ignore them. I remember a man in one of my classes who could not understand why he repeatedly encountered dishonesty in business partnerships. Every major venture seemed to attract partners who eventually betrayed his trust. Through understanding soul contracts, he came to recognize that these experiences were reflecting his own inner conflict about success and worthiness. At a subconscious level, he didn't believe he deserved success, and these soul-contracted partners were making this belief tangible through their actions. Once he healed this core belief about himself, the pattern of betrayal dissolved. The higher purpose behind painful human interactions always involves growth toward greater love, wisdom, and spiritual awareness. Your soul doesn't choose difficulty for its own sake, but for the expansion it makes possible. Think of how a muscle must be challenged and even slightly torn to grow stronger. In the same way, our capacity for love, forgiveness, discernment, and compassion can only develop when challenged. Your greatest enemy may be the soul who agreed to provide exactly the resistance needed for your spiritual muscles to develop. As we transition to exploring the specific types of soul contracts, I invite you to hold this understanding gently in your awareness. Behind every significant relationship in your life, especially the painful ones, lies a sacred agreement made between souls. When you begin to perceive these agreements, the narrative of your life transforms from a series of random encounters to a precisely orchestrated curriculum designed by your own soul for its highest evolution. This perspective doesn't eliminate pain, but it infuses that pain with meaning, and meaning makes any suffering bearable. In the words of the great psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. When we recognize the soul contracts operating in our most painful relationships, we discover that meaning. And in that discovery lies our liberation. Here's something most people never realize about the difficult relationships in their lives. They follow specific patterns, each designed to facilitate a particular kind of spiritual growth. Just as a skilled teacher creates different types of lessons to develop different aspects of a student's understanding, your soul creates various types of soul contracts to develop different aspects of your spiritual nature. There are people who study relationships their entire lives, yet miss the profound patterns hiding in plain sight. Some individuals approach difficult relationships with bitterness and resentment, believing themselves victims of others' failings. Others recognize these same relationships as opportunities for personal growth, yet still view them as random challenges rather than orchestrated lessons. The difference? Understanding that these relationships fall into specific categories, each with its unique purpose in your soul's curriculum. Let me introduce you to what I've come to recognize as the 5 primary types of soul contracts 5 distinct patterns of relationship your soul may have chosen for its evolution. These aren't just theoretical categories. They're living agreements that shape the most significant relationships in your life. Recognizing which type of contract you're experiencing is the first step toward extracting its spiritual lessons and fulfilling its highest purpose. Why is understanding these different types so essential? Because misidentifying the purpose of a soul contract often leads to prolonged suffering and delayed growth. When you don't understand the specific lesson a relationship is designed to teach, you may keep repeating painful patterns, wondering why you can't move beyond them. The person struggling with a mirroring contract might waste years trying to change the other person, never realizing that the relationship exists to reflect aspects of themselves that need healing. But when you correctly identify the type of soul contract you're experiencing, you gain immediate clarity about its purpose. This understanding illuminates the specific lessons to be learned, the growth to be achieved, and the transformation possible through the relationship. With this knowledge, what once seemed like endless, purposeless suffering becomes a precisely calibrated curriculum with clear objectives and an endpoint that can be reached. The first type of soul contract is what I call a mirroring contract. These are relationships specifically designed to reflect your unacknowledged shadow aspects, the parts of yourself you've denied, rejected, or pushed into the unconscious. The challenging people in these contracts display behaviors or qualities that trigger intense emotional reactions in you, not because they're fundamentally different from you, but because they're reflecting something within you that needs integration. I vividly recall a student named Michael, who came to me in deep distress over his relationship with his manager at work. "This man is impossible," Michael explained. "He's controlling, perfectionistic, and nothing I do is ever good enough for him." As we explored this relationship, Michael began to recognize that these were precisely the qualities he most strongly denied in himself. Though outwardly easygoing, inwardly he maintained impossibly high standards that made him perpetually dissatisfied with his own achievements. His manager was mirroring his own inner critic, making it visible so Michael could finally address it. Why do mirroring contracts matter so profoundly? Because without them, we would continue to deny our shadow aspects indefinitely. When these rejected parts remain in the unconscious, they control our lives from behind the scenes, creating patterns of suffering we can't explain or escape. The people who trigger us most intensely are actually offering a profound service. They're making visible what would otherwise remain hidden, giving us the opportunity to heal and integrate these aspects of ourselves. When you find yourself intensely triggered by someone's behavior, pause and ask yourself, what might this person be mirroring back to me? What quality or behavior that I see in them might also exist within me, perhaps in a different form? This simple practice can transform your most triggering relationships from sources of endless frustration into opportunities for profound self-awareness and healing. The second type of soul contract is the healing contract. These relationships are specifically designed to reopen old wounds, often from childhood or past lives, so they can finally be healed. Unlike mirroring contracts, which reflect present aspects of yourself, healing contracts activate unresolved pain from the past. The people in these contracts often resemble significant figures from earlier in your life or display similar behavioral patterns that reactivate old trauma. Consider the story of Sophia, who found herself repeatedly drawn to emotionally unavailable romantic partners. Each relationship followed the same painful pattern: initial interest and affection, followed by increasing distance and eventually abandonment. Through understanding soul contracts, Sophia came to recognize that these relationships were healing contracts designed to bring to the surface her unresolved pain from childhood abandonment by her mother. These partnerships weren't random bad luck, but precisely engineered opportunities to finally heal her core wound of abandonment. The key insight about healing contracts is that they persist until the wound is fully healed. If you find yourself repeatedly encountering the same painful relationship dynamic despite your best efforts to avoid it, you're likely experiencing a healing contract. Your soul has orchestrated these encounters not to torture you, but to give you multiple opportunities to address and heal the original wound. When engaged consciously, healing contracts offer the opportunity to finally break free from the pain of the past. Rather than simply re-experiencing the old wound, you can approach it with new awareness, understanding, and spiritual resources. The very relationship that activates your deepest pain can become the vehicle for its ultimate healing. The third type of soul contract is what I call an awakening contract. These relationships are designed to shake you out of spiritual sleep through particularly intense challenges. Awakening contracts often appear when your soul is ready to make a significant evolutionary leap, but your conscious self is resistant to change or growth. These relationships create circumstances so challenging that they force you to seek deeper meaning and develop new spiritual resources. I recall a woman named Claire whose husband suddenly announced, after 20 years of seemingly happy marriage, that he was leaving her for another woman. This devastating betrayal initially plunged Claire into the darkest period of her life. Yet as she struggled to make sense of her pain, she was drawn to spiritual teachings and practices she had previously dismissed. The crisis of her marriage became the catalyst for a profound spiritual awakening. Years later, she reflected that had it not been for this painful experience, she might never have awakened to her deeper spiritual nature. Awakening contracts are often the most difficult to recognize and accept in the moment because they typically involve experiences that feel like they might destroy us. Yet these are precisely the relationships that can catapult us into new levels of consciousness when engaged with awareness. As the Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Awakening contracts create the wound through which divine light can flood into our lives. If you're experiencing a relationship challenge that feels unbearable, that has shaken the very foundations of your life, consider the possibility that you're in an awakening contract. Ask yourself, how might this challenge be inviting me into a deeper spiritual understanding? What aspects of my spiritual nature might be awakening through this pain? These questions can begin to transform even the most devastating experiences into doorways to awakening. The fourth type of soul contract is the balance contract. These relationships help you experience the opposite of patterns you've lived in past incarnations. If your soul has spent many lifetimes in one extreme of a particular quality or experience, it may choose a balance contract to explore the opposite polarity in this lifetime. These contracts often involve situations that seem paradoxical or contradictory to your natural tendencies. For instance, a soul who has experienced many lifetimes of wealth and privilege might incarnate into circumstances of material struggle in this lifetime. A soul who has been fiercely independent through many incarnations might find itself in relationships of profound interdependence. These seemingly contradictory experiences aren't punishments, but opportunities to develop a more balanced and complete understanding. I remember a man named David who was a naturally gifted spiritual teacher with a profound connection to the divine. Yet he found himself in a marriage with a deeply skeptical, analytically minded woman who questioned every spiritual concept he embraced. This created tremendous tension in their relationship. Yet over time, David came to recognize that his wife was helping him balance his natural, mystical tendencies with greater critical thinking and practical grounding. What initially seemed like an incompatible match revealed itself as a perfectly designed balance contract. Balance contracts often feel uncomfortable because they push us to develop qualities or perspectives that don't come naturally to us. Yet they offer the opportunity to become more whole, to integrate aspects of experience our souls have previously neglected. When recognized and embraced, these contracts lead to a more complete expression of our spiritual nature. The fifth type of soul contract is the service contract. These are relationships where you've agreed to help another soul's evolution, often at significant personal cost. In service contracts, your primary role is not to learn, but to teach, not to receive, but to give. These contracts frequently involve relationships with people who present exceptional challenges or require extraordinary care, patience, or sacrifice. One of the most powerful examples of service contracts can be found in the relationship between parents and children with special needs or challenging circumstances. I've worked with many parents who, upon understanding soul contracts, recognized that they had made a pre-birth agreement to support a particular soul through especially difficult lessons. This understanding transformed their perception of their caretaking role from burden to sacred commitment. Service contracts aren't limited to parent-child relationships. They can appear in any context where you find yourself called to serve another's growth in ways that require significant giving of yourself. The key characteristic is that your primary growth comes not from what you receive, but from what you give, from the expansion of your capacity for selfless love, patience, and compassion. It's important to note that these 5 types of soul contracts aren't mutually exclusive. Many significant relationships in your life fulfill multiple contract types simultaneously. A particularly challenging parent-child relationship might be both a mirroring contract and a healing contract. A difficult marriage might serve as both an awakening contract and a balance contract. The complexity of these overlapping agreements speaks to the profound intelligence behind your soul's evolutionary design. To understand which type of contract you're experiencing in a particular relationship, pay attention to the specific challenges it presents and the emotions it triggers. Mirroring contracts provoke intense triggering around specific behaviors. Healing contracts activate old wounds and familiar pain patterns. Awakening contracts create life-altering crises that force spiritual growth. Balance contracts push you to develop qualities that feel unnatural or foreign. Service contracts call forth your capacity for selfless giving. As we prepare to explore how to recognize your own soul contracts in greater detail, remember that the relationship you've struggled with most might be the one with the greatest potential for your spiritual evolution. The weight training analogy is particularly apt here. Just as muscles require resistance to grow stronger, your soul requires the resistance of challenging relationships to develop its full spiritual capacity. Your enemies are, in this sense, the weight training equipment in the gym of your soul's evolution. Consider for a moment historical figures who experienced profound soul contracts. Gandhi's relationship with the British Empire represented a powerful awakening contract that catalyzed not only his personal spiritual growth, but a movement that transformed a nation. Nelson Mandela's relationship with the apartheid government of South Africa embodied both an awakening contract and a service contract that led to extraordinary spiritual development and social change. These soul contracts didn't just shape individual lives, they altered the course of history. As we move forward to explore how to recognize your own soul contracts, I invite you to begin viewing your most challenging relationships through this new lens. Behind the pain and difficulty lies a sacred agreement made with profound purpose. When you begin to perceive this purpose, the narrative of your life transforms from one of random suffering to one of precisely designed growth. And in this new narrative, even your greatest enemy becomes a sacred teacher on your journey towards spiritual awakening. This next part changed everything for me, and I believe it will for you as well. Understanding soul contracts in theory is enlightening, but learning to recognize them in your own life is truly transformative. Most people move through life never realizing that their most significant relationships, especially the painful ones, follow specific patterns that reveal their deeper purpose. But once you know what to look for, these patterns become strikingly clear, like constellations emerging from what once seemed random stars in the night sky. There are 2 fundamentally different approaches to life's difficult relationships. Most people experience challenging relationships as random misfortunes to be endured or escaped. They may learn something from these experiences, but they miss the profound orchestration behind them. Others, often after years of spiritual practice, begin to sense a mysterious intelligence operating through these same relationships, but lack the framework to fully understand what they're perceiving. The difference? Knowing how to recognize the telltale signs of soul contracts at work in your life. After guiding thousands of students through this process of recognition, I've identified 4 primary signs that indicate when a relationship is fulfilling a pre-birth soul agreement. These signs aren't theoretical, they're practical markers you can observe in your own experience. When you learn to recognize them, What once seemed like chaotic suffering reveals itself as a precisely orchestrated curriculum for your soul's evolution. Why does recognizing these signs matter so profoundly? Because continuing to view your most challenging relationships as random misfortunes keeps you trapped in patterns of victimhood and resentment. This perspective drains your vital energy and prevents you from extracting the spiritual gold these relationships contain. When you perceive yourself as the victim of others' actions, you remain powerless to transform your experience. But when you learn to recognize the signs of divine orchestration in these same relationships, everything changes. You begin to perceive yourself not as a victim, but as a soul who chose specific challenges for its growth. This shift in perception doesn't just change how you view others. It fundamentally transforms your relationship with suffering itself. What once seemed like meaningless pain reveals itself as purposeful catalysts for your evolution. The first and perhaps most telling sign of a soul contract is what I call the intensity paradox, the mysteriously disproportionate emotional reaction certain people trigger in you. We've all experienced encounters with individuals who provoke emotional responses that seem vastly out of proportion to the actual situation. A seemingly minor comment from a particular person can trigger an intense emotional reaction, while the same comment from someone else would barely register. This disproportionate triggering isn't random or irrational. It's one of the clearest indicators of a soul contract at work. Your soul recognizes, even when your conscious mind doesn't, that you're engaging with someone with whom you made a pre-birth agreement. The intensity of your reaction signals the significance of the contract and the importance of the lessons it contains. I recall a woman named Jennifer who came to one of my retreats deeply troubled by her reaction to a new colleague at work. "I can't explain it," she confessed. "This woman hasn't done anything truly offensive, yet I find myself irritated beyond reason by her presence. Even small interactions leave me angry for hours afterward." As Jennifer explored this reaction through the lens of soul contracts, she came to recognize that this colleague embodied qualities Jennifer had rejected in herself, particularly a kind of confident self-promotion that Jennifer had been taught was inappropriate for women. The intensity of her reaction was revealing a mirroring contract designed to help her reclaim her own power. When you encounter someone who triggers an unusually intense emotional reaction, pause and ask yourself, what might this intensity be revealing? What deeper connection or lesson might exist beneath this strong response? The very people who trigger you most powerfully are often those with whom you have the most significant soul contracts. The second sign of soul contracts at work in your life is the presence of recurring patterns and similar relationship dynamics that repeat across different people and contexts. When you find yourself encountering the same type of challenging dynamic repeatedly, despite your conscious efforts to avoid it, you're likely experiencing a soul contract that hasn't yet fulfilled its purpose. Consider Sarah, a student who had changed jobs multiple times, always seeking a more supportive work environment, only to repeatedly find herself working under critical, demanding supervisors. Despite moving to entirely different industries and geographic locations, the pattern persisted. Through understanding soul contracts, Sarah came to recognize that these recurring dynamics weren't bad luck, but a healing contract designed to help her address her deep-seated fear of authority and tendency towards self-criticism that originated in her relationship with her father. The key insight about recurring patterns is that they persist until their lesson is learned. Your soul will create similar scenarios, often with increasing intensity, until you recognize and address the core issue these relationships are designed to highlight. When you finally extract the spiritual lesson, the pattern dissolves, and these types of relationships cease to dominate your experience. If you notice a challenging relationship pattern that has appeared multiple times in your life, consider it a signpost pointing toward an important soul contract. Ask yourself, what might my soul be trying to teach me through this recurring pattern? What growth or healing might these repeated experiences be designed to facilitate? The answer to these questions often reveals the purpose of the contract and the key to its fulfillment. The third sign of soul contracts is the presence of what I call synchronicity markers, the impossible coincidences that often surround your most significant relationships. These are the mysterious alignments of events that brought you together with particular individuals in ways that defy statistical probability. Perhaps you met at a location neither of you normally frequents, or a chain of seemingly random events led to your encounter. These synchronicities aren't random. They're the visible traces of your soul's orchestration. I remember a man named Michael who described meeting his most challenging business partner, a relationship that ultimately cost him his company, but catalyzed profound spiritual growth. I had missed my flight, something I'd never done before, Michael explained. I was rebooked on a later flight, which was then delayed by weather. I ended up sitting next to this person for hours during the delay, and our conversation eventually led to our business partnership. Looking back, so many improbable events had to align for us to meet. These synchronicities were signposts of the soul contract that existed between them. Synchronicity markers often become visible only in retrospect, as you look back on how certain key relationships formed in your life. Yet becoming aware of them reinforces your understanding that there are no accidents in the universe, that even your most challenging relationships have been precisely orchestrated for your growth. The fourth sign of soul contracts is the presence of inner knowing, a deep, intuitive recognition that often occurs when you first meet someone significant to your soul journey. Many people describe an immediate sense of familiarity or significance upon meeting certain individuals, a feeling that this person is going to be important in my life, even before any meaningful interaction has occurred. This intuitive recognition is your soul acknowledging another soul with whom it has made an agreement. A student once described to me her first meeting with the woman who would become her most challenging yet growth-catalyzing mentor. The moment she walked into the room, I felt a strange combination of excitement and dread. Something in me recognized her significance before we even spoke. It was as if my soul was saying, "Here she is. The contract begins now." This inner knowing wasn't coincidental. It was her soul recognizing a pre-birth agreement about to unfold in physical reality. Think of these four signs: intensity of emotional reaction, recurring patterns, synchronicity markers, and inner knowing as X marks on the treasure map of your spiritual journey. They indicate the locations of your most valuable soul contracts, the relationships that contain the greatest potential for your evolution. When you learn to recognize these markers, you begin to navigate your life with greater awareness of the sacred agreements unfolding through your relationships. Consider how these signs might be appearing in your own life. Who triggers unusually intense emotional reactions in you? What relationship patterns have recurred despite your efforts to avoid them? What impossible coincidences brought certain significant people into your life? With whom did you experience an immediate sense of recognition or significance upon first meeting? The answers to these questions will likely reveal your most important soul contracts. Let me share a personal experience that illustrates how these signs can reveal a significant soul contract. Early in my mission to the West, I encountered a particularly challenging student who questioned my teachings publicly and created considerable difficulty for me. My initial reaction was unusually intense, a combination of irritation and discomfort that seemed disproportionate to the situation. As I meditated on this reaction, I recognized that this student was reflecting my own subtle doubts about how my Eastern teachings would be received in the Western world. The synchronicities surrounding our meeting were remarkable. Multiple coincidental circumstances had brought this person to my lectures repeatedly. Through this relationship, I was forced to clarify my teachings and strengthen my own conviction. What initially appeared as an obstacle revealed itself as a precisely designed growth opportunity, a mirroring contract my soul had created for its evolution. Many of my students have experienced similar recognition. One woman kept attracting romantic partners who were emotionally unavailable, despite consciously seeking connected, available men. The intensity of her emotional reactions to these partners was the first clue to the soul contract at work. The recurring pattern appearing across different men with otherwise dissimilar personalities was the second. When she examined the synchronicities that brought these men into her life, she found remarkable similarities. And with each, she had experienced an initial inner knowing, a sense that this person would be significant, despite red flags her conscious mind recognized. Through these signs, she came to understand that she was experiencing a healing contract designed to address her core wound of abandonment from childhood. As you begin to recognize these signs in your own life, you may discover that relationships you've long perceived as unfortunate accidents or cruel twists of fate were, in fact, precisely orchestrated opportunities for your spiritual evolution. This recognition doesn't eliminate the pain these relationships may have caused, but it infuses that pain with meaning and purpose. And meaning transforms suffering from something to be merely endured into something that can be consciously engaged for growth. As we prepare to explore the higher purpose behind enemy contracts specifically, I invite you to reflect on the relationships that have challenged you most deeply. Can you recognize the signs of soul contracts at work in these relationships? Can you begin to perceive the sacred agreements that might be unfolding through even your most painful encounters? This recognition is the first step toward conscious engagement with your soul contracts toward extracting their spiritual gold and fulfilling their highest purpose. Remember, the very relationships that have caused you the greatest pain may contain the seeds of your most profound evolution. When you learn to recognize the signs of these sacred agreements, you begin to navigate your life with greater awareness of the divine orchestration operating through all your relationships. And in this awareness lies the potential for transformation not just of how you perceive others, but of how you understand yourself as a soul on a journey of awakening. Here's something most spiritual seekers eventually discover, yet few fully comprehend. Your greatest enemy may be your most important spiritual teacher. The person who has caused you the most pain might be fulfilling the most sacred contract your soul made before incarnating. This understanding challenges everything our culture tells us about difficult relationships, yet it contains the key to liberation from our deepest suffering. There exist two fundamentally different approaches to dealing with those who have hurt us. The conventional approach sees enemies as people to be avoided, overcome, or defended against. This perspective creates separation, perpetuates suffering, and keeps us trapped in cycles of victimhood and resentment. The higher perspective, the soul's perspective, recognizes that these same challenging individuals may be playing roles our souls specifically requested for our evolution. The difference? Understanding the profound spiritual purpose these difficult relationships serve. Through decades of spiritual exploration and working with thousands of seekers, I've come to recognize that enemy contracts, those soul agreements with people who cause us significant pain, serve specific and essential functions in our spiritual development. These aren't random misfortunes, but precisely calibrated opportunities for growth that can only occur through challenge. When we understand these purposes, our perception transforms, and relationships that once seemed merely painful reveal themselves as sacred classrooms for our soul's education. Why does understanding the purpose of enemy contracts matter so profoundly? Because without this understanding, we remain trapped in the prison of resentment, replaying our wounds and perpetuating our suffering. This perspective keeps us energetically bound to those who have hurt us, unable to extract the spiritual gold these relationships contain. We carry the weight of these unresolved contracts through our days, draining our life force and coloring our experience of the present with the pain of the past. But when we recognize the higher purpose behind these challenging relationships, when we understand why our soul chose these specific contracts, everything changes. The prison door of resentment swings open. We begin to see even those who have hurt us most deeply, not as villains but as souls playing roles in service to our evolution. This shift in perception doesn't just change how we view others. It fundamentally transforms our relationship with suffering itself. The first and perhaps most important purpose of enemy contracts is the development of essential spiritual qualities that cannot emerge without challenge. Just as physical muscles require resistance to grow stronger, certain spiritual qualities can only develop when faced with opposition. Forgiveness, compassion, discernment, inner strength, boundary setting, and unconditional love, these foundational spiritual capacities, require the resistance of difficult relationships to reach their full expression. Consider for a moment, how could you develop genuine forgiveness without experiencing something that feels unforgivable? How could you cultivate true compassion without encountering someone who tests the limits of your understanding? How could you learn proper discernment and boundary setting without meeting those who would cross your boundaries? The very qualities most essential to your spiritual evolution require the challenges that enemy contracts provide. I remember a student named Robert who harbored intense resentment toward a former business partner who had betrayed him, costing him his company and financial security. For years, Robert had viewed this person solely as an enemy who had destroyed what he'd built. Through understanding soul contracts, Robert began to recognize how this painful experience had developed qualities he would never have cultivated otherwise resilience, discernment, humility, and eventually, forgiveness. I realized, Robert told me, that without this experience, I would have remained spiritually underdeveloped in crucial ways. As painful as it was, this relationship forced growth that nothing else could have stimulated. Think of difficult relationships as the spiritual gym where your soul builds its muscles. The person who betrayed your trust is the weight that strengthens your discernment. The individual who rejected you is the resistance that builds your self-worth. The one who criticized you harshly is the training that develops your inner validation. Without these specific challenges, these spiritual muscles would remain undeveloped, regardless of how many hours you might spend in meditation or prayer. This doesn't mean that suffering itself is the goal. Suffering is merely the catalyst for growth when engaged consciously. Your soul doesn't choose painful relationships because it desires pain, but because it understands that certain qualities can only emerge through specific challenges. When you recognize this purpose, you can approach your most difficult relationships not as punishments to be endured, but as opportunities to be consciously engaged for your evolution. The second profound purpose of enemy contracts is to facilitate the transcendence of duality, moving beyond the perception of good people and bad people, to recognize the underlying unity of all souls. This transcendence represents one of the most advanced spiritual realizations, and enemy contracts provide the perfect laboratory for its development. Our conventional perception divides the world into heroes and villains, victims and perpetrators, friends and enemies. This dualistic view feels natural to the ego, but ultimately perpetuates separation and suffering. Enemy contracts challenge this perspective by revealing that the souls who have caused us the greatest pain may be playing these difficult roles out of a profound love at the soul level, a willingness to temporarily embody qualities, catalyze our growth, even at the cost of being perceived as villains in our life story. I recall a profound teaching moment with a woman named Claire who had experienced severe childhood abuse. After years of healing work, she had a deep meditation experience in which she glimpsed the pre-birth agreement she had made with the soul who would become her abusive parent. In this expanded state of awareness, she recognized that this soul had agreed to play an extraordinarily difficult role that would ultimately lead Claire to develop exceptional compassion, which would later allow her to help thousands of other abuse survivors. This recognition didn't erase the pain of her experience, but it transformed her relationship to it. She moved beyond seeing her parents simply as a villain to recognizing the complex soul agreement that had played out between them. This transcendence of duality doesn't mean condoning harmful behavior or denying the very real consequences of others' actions. Rather, it means developing the capacity to perceive the deeper currents operating beneath the surface of human interactions, to recognize that at the soul level, there are no enemies, only teachers in various disguises. This perception represents a profound spiritual achievement that enemy contracts are specifically designed to facilitate. The third essential purpose of enemy contracts is to provide the opportunity for liberation from identification with victimhood. Many souls choose challenging relationships precisely because these experiences can catalyze a shift from perceived powerlessness to spiritual empowerment. When we view ourselves primarily as victims of others' actions, we remain trapped in a state of disempowerment. Our happiness, growth, and evolution seem to depend on what others do or don't do to us. This perspective keeps us energetically bound to those who have hurt us and prevents us from claiming our spiritual sovereignty. Enemy contracts provide the perfect opportunity to transcend this limited self-perception. When we recognize that our soul chose these challenging relationships for its growth, we shift from victim to creator, from passive recipient of others' actions to active architect of our spiritual evolution. This shift doesn't deny the pain we've experienced, but transforms our relationship to it. I worked with a man named Daniel who had experienced severe workplace bullying that led to depression and anxiety. For years, he had seen himself as the unfortunate victim of a toxic boss and culture. Through understanding soul contracts, Daniel began to recognize how this painful experience was catalyzing growth he had been resisting for many lifetimes, particularly the development of his voice, boundaries, and authentic self-expression. As he shifted from seeing himself as a victim to recognizing himself as a soul who had chosen this challenge for specific growth, his depression lifted. The situation hadn't changed, but his relationship to it had transformed completely. This liberation from victimhood represents one of the most profound gifts enemy contracts offer. When fully realized, it leads to a state of spiritual sovereignty where your well-being no longer depends on how others treat you, but on your conscious engagement with the lessons each relationship contains. This doesn't mean never experiencing pain, but it means relating to that pain as a catalyst for growth rather than evidence of victimization. The fourth purpose of enemy contracts, and perhaps the most mysterious, relates to what some souls agree to do for others, specifically the profound spiritual service provided by those who agree to play the villain in another's life story. This perspective invites us to consider enemy contracts not just from what we receive, but from what the other soul has agreed to give. Some of the most advanced souls occasionally incarnate to play challenging roles in others' lives, knowing they may be perceived as villains but understanding the growth these difficult interactions will catalyze. These souls agree to temporarily take on qualities that will trigger others' evolution, often at significant personal cost. This represents one of the most profound expressions of love at the soul level, a willingness to be misperceived and even vilified in service to another's growth. I'm reminded of a profound realization experienced by Thomas, a student who had struggled with a particularly critical and demanding father. Through deep meditation on soul contracts, Thomas glimpsed the possibility that his father's soul had agreed to embody these challenging qualities, precisely because they would stimulate Thomas's development of self-worth, independent of external validation, a quality his soul had struggled to develop over many lifetimes. This recognition didn't excuse his father's behavior, but allowed Thomas to perceive the possible soul agreement behind it. I realized, Thomas shared, that at some level his soul might have loved mine enough to play this difficult role, knowing how it would be perceived. Consider for a moment that the person who has hurt you most deeply might, at the soul level, have agreed to play this challenging role out of profound love for your soul and commitment to your evolution. This perspective doesn't deny the pain their actions have caused, but opens the possibility of perceiving a deeper purpose behind even the most difficult relationships. Throughout history, spiritual teachers have embodied this understanding. When Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," he was recognizing that his persecutors were playing roles they didn't fully understand from their limited human perspective. When the Buddha maintained compassion for those who attacked him, he was perceiving the divine purpose operating through even hostile interactions. These masters understood what most of us glimpse only occasionally, that behind the appearance of enemies lies the reality of souls playing roles in a divine curriculum. I personally experienced this understanding through my relationship with a particularly difficult authority figure during my early spiritual training. This individual criticized me harshly and publicly, creating significant obstacles in my path. For years, I perceived him simply as an adversary. Through deep meditation, I eventually recognized that this challenging relationship had been specifically designed to help me develop unshakable conviction in my spiritual understanding, a quality I would need for the mission that awaited me. Without this opposition, I might never have developed the strength required to bring Eastern wisdom to the Western world. What I had long perceived as an unfortunate obstacle revealed itself as a precisely designed opportunity for essential growth. As we prepare to explore how to consciously engage with and ultimately release these soul contracts, I invite you to consider the challenging relationships in your own life through this new lens. The individuals who have caused you the greatest pain may be fulfilling the most important soul contracts you made before incarnating. They may be providing exactly the resistance your soul needs to develop its full spiritual capacity. This understanding doesn't eliminate the pain these relationships have caused, but it infuses that pain with meaning and purpose. And meaning transforms suffering from something to be merely endured into something that can be consciously engaged for evolution. When you begin to perceive even your enemies as souls playing roles in service to your growth, the entire narrative of your life transforms. What once seemed like senseless suffering reveals itself as a precisely designed curriculum for your soul's awakening. Remember, the spiritual gym analogy applies perfectly here. The heavier the weight, the greater the potential for strength development. Your greatest enemies may be the heaviest weights in your spiritual training, providing exactly the resistance your soul needs to develop its full capacity. When viewed through this lens, even the most painful relationships reveal themselves as sacred opportunities for growth, that your soul specifically chose for its evolution. This next part contains what might be the most practically valuable insight of all: how to consciously engage with your soul contracts to extract their lessons, fulfill their purpose, and ultimately release both yourself and the other person from the agreement. Because understanding soul contracts is enlightening, but knowing how to work with them transforms your entire life experience. There are two fundamentally different ways people respond to difficult relationships once they understand soul contracts. Some recognize these sacred agreements intellectually, but continue to engage with challenging relationships from a place of resentment and resistance. Others learn to consciously participate in the fulfillment of these contracts, extracting their spiritual lessons and eventually releasing both souls from the agreement. The difference? Understanding the practical process of fulfillment and release. Through working with thousands of students navigating challenging soul contracts, I've developed a clear framework for this process, a path that leads from unconscious suffering to conscious engagement and ultimately to liberation. This isn't just theoretical understanding, but a practical methodology that transforms how you experience your most difficult relationships. When applied with sincerity, it can free you from patterns of suffering that may have persisted for decades or even lifetimes. Why does knowing this process matter so profoundly? Because without it, you might recognize soul contracts intellectually while remaining emotionally trapped in cycles of pain. You might understand why certain relationships are challenging without knowing how to extract their lessons and move forward. This partial understanding can actually intensify suffering as you recognize the purpose behind your pain but feel powerless to fulfill it. But when you understand the practical steps for fulfilling and releasing soul contracts, everything changes. You move from passive recipient of others' actions to active participant in your soul's curriculum. You gain the ability to extract the spiritual gold from even your most painful relationships and to release both yourself and others from agreements that have served their purpose. This knowledge represents one of the most liberating understandings available to us as souls on the human journey. The first essential practice for engaging consciously with soul contracts is what I call the perception shift, learning to see through the eyes of the soul rather than the wounded ego. This shift involves deliberately moving from the limited human perspective, which perceives others primarily as sources of pain or pleasure, to the soul's perspective, which recognizes the sacred agreements operating through all significant relationships. This perception shift doesn't happen automatically or permanently. It requires consistent practice, a willingness to repeatedly redirect your awareness from the ego's reactivity to the soul's understanding. Each time you find yourself caught in resentment, victimhood, or blame regarding a difficult relationship, you have the opportunity to practice this shift, to ask yourself, how might my soul view this relationship? What sacred agreement might be operating here? I work with a woman named Rachel who had experienced a painful betrayal by her closest friend. For months, Rachel had been consumed by hurt and anger, replaying the betrayal in her mind and feeling the wound reopening with each remembrance. I guided Rachel through a specific meditation practice designed to facilitate the perception shift. I asked her to close her eyes, center her awareness in her heart, and imagine viewing the situation from progressively higher perspectives, first from a few feet above the scene, then from high above looking down, and finally from the perspective of her eternal soul, looking at the entire pattern of her incarnation. From this expanded awareness, Rachel glimpsed something she couldn't perceive from her wounded perspective, that this painful betrayal was catalyzing growth she had been resisting for many lifetimes, particularly around self-worth and establishing healthy boundaries. She saw that her soul had actually chosen this challenging experience precisely because it would finally stimulate this essential development. This glimpse didn't eliminate her pain, but it transformed her relationship to it. The betrayal no longer appeared as senseless suffering, but as a precisely designed catalyst for her evolution. This perception shift practice becomes most powerful when integrated into daily life. Whenever you find yourself triggered by a difficult relationship, pause and consciously shift your perspective. Ask, how would my eternal soul view this situation? What growth might this challenge be designed to stimulate? This simple practice, repeated consistently, gradually rewires your default perception from ego-based reactivity to soul-based understanding. The second essential practice for fulfilling soul contracts is identifying the specific lesson your soul aimed to learn through the relationship. Each significant soul contract contains particular spiritual lessons that your soul determined were essential for its evolution. Consciously identifying these lessons accelerates their integration and moves the contract toward fulfillment. To identify these lessons, look for the patterns in your emotional reactions. What specific qualities or behaviors in the other person trigger you most intensely? These triggers often point directly to the lessons your soul is seeking to learn. For instance, if you're intensely triggered by someone's criticism, the lesson might involve developing self-worth independent of others' opinions. If you're triggered by controlling behavior, the lesson might involve establishing healthy boundaries or reclaiming your personal power. Another approach is to ask yourself, how have I grown through this challenging relationship? What qualities have I developed that I might not have developed otherwise? Often, you've already begun learning the lessons your soul intended, even if you weren't consciously aware of the process. Recognizing this growth can reveal the purpose behind the contract. I remember a man named James, who had experienced years of conflict with his brother. When I guided James to identify the specific lessons in this contract, he realized that the relationship had forced him to develop assertiveness, clear communication, and the ability to maintain his center in conflict qualities he had avoided developing in many past incarnations. Once James consciously recognized these lessons, he could engage with the relationship more purposefully, focusing on these specific areas of growth rather than simply reacting to his brother's triggering behaviors. The key insight here is that soul contracts contain specific lessons, not general suffering. Your soul didn't choose difficulty for its own sake, but for the particular growth it would catalyze. When you identify these specific lessons, you can engage with the contract more efficiently, accelerating your growth and moving the agreement toward fulfillment. The third essential practice for working with soul contracts is the forgiveness process that liberates both souls from the energetic bonds of the agreement. True forgiveness isn't about condoning harmful behavior or pretending you weren't hurt. It's about recognizing the divine purpose behind even painful interactions and releasing the energetic charge they carry in your system. This forgiveness process involves several key elements. First, acknowledging the full reality of what occurred and the impact it had on you. Spiritual bypassing pretending you weren't hurt when you were actually blocks authentic forgiveness. Second, recognizing the soul agreement behind the interaction, understanding that at some level, both souls agreed to this experience for purposes of growth. Third, identifying and integrating the lessons the experience contained. And finally, consciously releasing both yourself and the other person from the energetic bonds of resentment and blame. I guided a woman named Sophia through this process regarding her relationship with her mother, who had been emotionally abusive throughout Sophia's childhood. First, Sophia fully acknowledged the pain she had experienced and its impact on her life, the low self-worth, the difficulty trusting others, the pattern of attracting critical partners. Then, through meditation, she glimpsed the possibility that her soul had chosen this relationship to develop self-love and inner validation, independent of external approval qualities she would need for her soul's purpose as a healer and teacher. As Sophia identified and began consciously developing these qualities, something remarkable happened. The emotional charge around her mother's criticism began to dissipate. She could engage with her mother without being triggered by behaviors that previously would have devastated her. Eventually, Sophia reached a state where she could genuinely thank her soul and her mother's soul for creating the conditions that, though painful, had led to essential growth. This wasn't intellectual bypassing, but authentic recognition of the divine purpose behind a difficult relationship. The forgiveness process doesn't necessarily mean reconciling with people who have hurt you, especially in cases of abuse or ongoing harm. Sometimes fulfilling a soul contract requires separation once its lessons have been learned. The key is to release the energetic bonds of resentment and blame, whether or not you maintain contact with the person. This energetic release frees both souls from the contract. The fourth essential practice involves recognizing when a contract has fulfilled its purpose. Soul contracts aren't meant to create endless suffering. They contain specific lessons, and once those lessons have been integrated, the contract has served its purpose. Learning to recognize completion allows you to consciously release agreements that have fulfilled their function. How do you know when a soul contract has fulfilled its purpose? There are several clear signs. First, the emotional triggering diminishes or disappears entirely. Interactions or memories that once provoked intense reactions no longer carry the same emotional charge. Second, you notice concrete evidence of your growth in the specific areas the relationship was designed to develop. Third, you can perceive the divine purpose behind the relationship with genuine gratitude rather than intellectual understanding alone. And fourth, you feel a sense of completion, an intuitive recognition that this chapter of your soul's curriculum has served its purpose. I worked with a man named Michael who had experienced a devastating business betrayal that cost him his company and financial security. For years, Michael had been consumed by resentment toward his former partner. Through understanding soul contracts, Michael recognized that this painful experience had been designed to develop his resilience, inner security beyond material success, and capacity for forgiveness. Over time, as Michael integrated these lessons, he noticed the emotional charge around the betrayal diminishing. Eventually, he reached a state where he could think of his former partner without resentment, even with a sense of gratitude for the growth this challenging relationship had catalyzed. When Michael asked how he could be sure the contract had fulfilled its purpose, I guided him to check the signs of completion. The emotional triggering had dissolved. He no longer felt anger or resentment when thinking of his former partner. He could identify concrete evidence of his growth in resilience and inner security. He felt genuine gratitude for the lessons the experience had contained. And he experienced an intuitive sense of completion, a recognition that this chapter had served its purpose, and it was time to move forward. Recognizing completion doesn't always mean the relationship ends. Sometimes fulfilled soul contracts evolve into new, more harmonious agreements. The key is consciously acknowledging the completion of the original contract and releasing both souls from its specific terms. This recognition creates space for the relationship to transform or, if appropriate, to dissolve with grace and gratitude. Think of soul contracts like the grades in school. Each grade contains specific lessons, and once those lessons are mastered, you graduate to the next level. Remaining in the same grade after mastering its curriculum serves neither your growth nor the school's purpose. Similarly, remaining energetically bound to soul contracts that have served their purpose delays both souls' evolution. Conscious recognition of completion honors the divine intelligence behind the agreement while creating space for new growth. The process of fulfilling and releasing soul contracts transforms you from student to master of life's lessons. Instead of unconsciously repeating patterns of suffering, you become an active participant in your soul's curriculum, extracting the spiritual gold from challenging relationships and consciously releasing agreements that have served their purpose. This mastery doesn't mean avoiding difficult relationships, but engaging with them purposefully, with awareness of the growth they're designed to catalyze. Consider the story of a woman who transformed her relationship with an abusive parent through understanding soul contracts. After years of therapy and personal growth work, she still found herself triggered by interactions with her father. Through the lens of soul contracts, she recognized that this challenging relationship had been designed to help her develop boundaries, self-worth, and eventually, the capacity for compassion beyond judgment qualities essential for her soul's purpose as a healer. As she consciously engaged with these lessons, her experience of the relationship transformed. She established clear boundaries that protected her well-being while allowing limited contact. She developed self-worth independent of her father's approval. And eventually, she cultivated compassion for the wounded human being behind his harmful behavior, while never condoning the abuse itself. Over time, the emotional charge around the relationship diminished, and she experienced a sense of completion, a recognition that the contract had fulfilled its purpose. This completion allowed her to release both herself and her father from the energetic bonds of the agreement, creating space for her next stage of growth. This transformation resembles the butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. The struggle against the chrysalis's resistance is precisely what develops the butterfly's wing strength, making flight possible. If you were to help a butterfly by cutting open the chrysalis, you would actually prevent its wings from developing properly. Similarly, the resistance provided by challenging relationships is exactly what develops your spiritual strength. When engaged consciously, these relationships become not obstacles to happiness, but catalysts for the development of your soul's full capacity. As we prepare for our final reflections, I invite you to consider how you might apply these practices to your own challenging relationships. Which soul contracts in your life might be awaiting conscious engagement? What specific lessons might they contain? How might you shift your perception to see these relationships through the eyes of your soul rather than your wounded ego? And which contracts might have already fulfilled their purpose, awaiting your conscious recognition of completion? Remember, the path of fulfilling and releasing soul contracts isn't about intellectual understanding alone, but about practical transformation of your lived experience. It's about moving from unconscious suffering to conscious engagement with your soul's curriculum. This path doesn't eliminate life's challenges, but it infuses them with meaning and purpose, transforming even the most difficult relationships into sacred opportunities for evolution. And in this transformation lies one of the most profound liberations available to us as souls on the human journey. As we draw our time together to a close, I invite you to reflect on the relationships that have caused you the greatest pain. With this new understanding of soul contracts, can you begin to glimpse the higher purpose that might be at work? Can you sense, perhaps even faintly, how these challenging souls have served as catalysts for your growth? Remember that recognizing the spiritual purpose behind difficult relationships does not mean condoning harmful behavior. It does not require you to maintain unsafe connections or to deny the very real hurt you've experienced. Rather, it offers a perspective that frees you from the prison of resentment and victimhood, allowing you to extract the spiritual gold from even your most painful encounters. The greatest liberation comes when you understand that no one can truly harm the eternal soul that you are. They can challenge you, they can trigger your unhealed wounds, they can even cause temporary suffering to your human self, but your divine essence remains untouched, gathering wisdom from every experience. I encourage you to approach your difficult relationships with this new awareness. Ask yourself, what might my soul have been seeking to learn through this encounter? What qualities have I developed because of this challenge that I might not have developed otherwise? How has this person, perhaps unwittingly, served as a teacher on my spiritual journey? When you can answer these questions with sincerity, you will feel the heavy burden of resentment begin to lift. You will recognize the divine orchestration behind even your most painful relationships. And in that recognition comes a profound freedom, the freedom to honor the contract by learning its lessons, and then to release both yourself and the other person from its bonds. This understanding has transformed countless lives, including my own. It has the power to heal ancient wounds, to transmute suffering into wisdom, and to reveal the profound interconnection between all souls on their journey toward awakening. If you found value in this teaching, I invite you to share your insights in the comments below. Each of your stories adds to our collective understanding of the soul's journey. Subscribe to this channel for more spiritual wisdom that illuminates the deeper currents of human experience. And if this message has touched you, please consider sharing it with someone who might be struggling with a difficult relationship. Remember, the face of your enemy is also the face of the divine, playing a role in the cosmic drama of your soul's evolution. When you can see this truth, even through tears, you have begun to see with the eyes of the immortal self. Until we meet again, may you recognize the sacred purpose behind every relationship in your life, and may this recognition bring you peace that passes all understanding. My beloved, let me speak to the ancient part of you, the part that remembers even if your mind has forgotten. There is a law, eternal and bright, that once lived in the heart of every true religion. It was known not by words alone, but by vibration, by soul recognition. And though the centuries have passed like shadows across the earth, this law has never ceased to shine, just as the sun continues to glow behind even the darkest of storm clouds. But oh, how far mankind has wandered from it. The world, once illumined by sages, saints, and Christ-like souls, has turned its gaze outward, chasing rituals and doctrines, forgetting the living presence within. This law is not a rule enforced by dogma. It is a divine rhythm, a spiritual current, a sacred science of return to the infinite. Like sunlight behind a stone wall, always there, always waiting, it has remained hidden, not by malevolence, but by mankind's increasing thirst for the surface of things, the glittering shell of form, forgetting the pearl of truth within. There was a time, lost to the history books, but alive in the memory of the soul, when all religions touched the hem of this universal principle. The rishis of India knew it as Sanatana Dharmathi, eternal truth. The early mystics of Christianity knew it as the path of the single eye. In the quiet temples of Tibet, in the forgotten deserts of the Essenes, it was guarded like a treasure too sacred for the crowds. This spiritual law is not about belief. It is about union. Not about worshiping from afar, but merging into oneness. It teaches that man is not a sinner groveling in dust, but a soul cloaked in forgetfulness, capable of awakening into divinity itself. All the Holy Scriptures, when seen through the lens of realization, whisper the same truth. The kingdom of God is within you. But to enter that kingdom, there is a science, a method, a precise spiritual law that bridges time and eternity, body and spirit. What is the cost of forgetting such a law? It is the restlessness that haunts even the most devout. It is the endless search for peace in temples built of stone, while the temple within lies dark and unopened. It is the spiritual fatigue of those who pray but do not feel, who chant but do not know, who believe but do not experience. You may have walked 100 paths, tried 1,000 mantras, read the scriptures of East and West, and still felt a longing, unsatisfied, a call, unanswered. That ache within you is the echo of this hidden law trying to call you home. I tell you, not as a scholar, but as a soul who has walked through fire and silence to find God, this law is not forgotten in heaven. It lives still. And now, in this age of awakening, it rises again like the dawn. Let us journey together, my friend, not into speculation, but into remembrance. Let the veil of centuries fall, not by rebellion against religion, but by reuniting with the spirit behind it. You are not seeking something new, you are remembering something eternal. A divine law is not born, it is revealed when the soul is ready. And I say to you now, you are ready. For had you not been, these words would not have found you. Shall I take you deeper now into why this radiant law disappeared from the pages of history, and why the world has wandered so far from its light? There was a time when divine law was not only known, but lived not through sermons, not in stone temples, but in the inner sanctuaries of illumined souls. The great ones knew it not as a doctrine, but as vibration. They moved in harmony with this law, as naturally as the moon follows its orbit around the earth. But as the great yugas turned, as consciousness declined from Satya into Kali Yuga, humanity forgot its source and grew blind to its own soul. What was once radiant law became legend, and then myth, and finally heresy. The science of divine returned, the sacred geometry of soul union through breath, stillness, and inner communion, was buried beneath rituals, obscured by politics, and sealed off by the rising walls of orthodoxy. Yogananda explained that truths are revealed in clarity during high ages of consciousness. But when spiritual darkness settles over the world, the light of divine perception is eclipsed. The law I speak of, the sacred law of Kriya Yoga, was not created by any religion. It is the eternal pathway planted in the soul by God Himself, a pathway that the ancient rishis walked, that Krishna hinted toward, that Jesus practiced in silence, and that Babaji revived once the world was ready to remember again. But why was it hidden? Because to possess this law is to hold power not over others but over the self. And power over the self is the one thing empires, dogmas, and fears could never control. In the downward cycle of Kali Yuga, mankind lost the ability to comprehend inner truths. As breath became more erratic, as desires grew louder than devotion, the still sanctuary of divine perception was boarded shut by noise, by haste, by intellect unillumined by spirit. Priests began to teach form instead of force, dogma instead of direct communion. And in this blindness, the true spiritual law Kriya, the science of soul evolution, was placed behind veils of secrecy, guarded by the Himalayan masters not out of arrogance, but to preserve its sanctity. Yogananda wrote, "Whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate on earth to restore the balance." This is not only the promise of Krishna, it is the inner mission of every spiritual lawgiver who remembers God and vows to awaken others. The West, too, once held the essence of this law. In the desert stillness of Christ's prayer, in the cave-bound revelations of the Essenes, in the whispered words of mystics persecuted by church and state, there flickered the remnants of this sacred science. But those who had the eyes to see were often cast aside, and those who knew the inner meaning dared not speak it aloud. Power clung to ritual. Control feared realization. And so, for 20 years, the world wandered. Yet even when it disappeared from temples, it never left the soul. A divine law cannot die. it can only be forgotten. And just as spring follows winter, as consciousness inevitably rises after its lowest point, so too did this law begin to reawaken. In 1861, deep in the Himalayas, Mahavatar Babaji called to Lahiri Mahasaya and placed once again the living current of Kriya into the hands of one ready to share it. Yogananda was later sent by divine command to carry this law across oceans, to remind the world not only of what it had forgotten, but of what it has always been. This is why this law disappeared, not because it was lost, but because we lost the stillness to feel it. And now, through the grace of the Masters, it is returning not as a secret, but as a sacred trust. And you, beloved soul, are part of that return. Beloved soul, beyond the noise of restless thought and the parade of fleeting emotions, there exists a sacred, low-ancient, unchanging divine. It is not etched upon stone tablets, nor bound by the institutions of man. This law does not tremble before kings, nor does it change with the winds of religious fashion. It is the law by which the soul returns to God, the very science of divine remembrance. And though it was hidden, forgotten, veiled for centuries beneath dogma and dust, this law has waited patiently, like a silent altar within the temple of your spine, untouched but never absent, as if holding its breath for the day when you would turn inward and remember that you were never truly lost. This, dear one, is the law of Kriya. Not a technique, not a ritual, not a philosophy. It is the spiritual architecture of the soul's homeward path. Kriya Yoga is not merely an exercise of breath, but the awakening of the divine altar that lies hidden within you. Just as the stars do not require our recognition to shine, the spinal pathway of light from the base of the spine to the thousand-petaled lotus at the crownas always existed as the inner axis of sacred return. And it is here, in this ascending river of life force, that the forgotten law of God communion abides. Kriya, as I have revealed it, is the science of breath mastery and spiritual stillness, a sacred method taught to me by my line of gurus Lahiri Mahasaya, who received it directly from the deathless Babaji, who gave it anew for this age, knowing that the souls of men had wandered too far into restlessness and needed a bridge to carry them back to their native land of peace. Kriya is not Hindu, it is not Eastern, it is not even mine, it is eternal. It is the divine law that governs how spirit flows through matter, how breath tethers consciousness to the body, and how, through devotion and divine technique, that breath can be withdrawn, the senses calmed, the mind silenced, and the soul released to soar. What you call breath, I call the rope of karma. Each inhalation draws the mind outward, attaching it to the senses, binding it to the play of Maya. Each restless breath fans the flames of desire, and every desire sows new seeds of reincarnation. But what if you could reverse that current? What if, instead of moving outward into the world, your life force began to ascend inward, drawing you back through the inner altar of the spine to the throne of God within? This is the law Kriya reveals. And this is why, though it was known in ancient times, it was hidden not because it was unworthy, but because man was not yet ready to carry it without distortion. It is the sacred fire. Mishandled, it blinds. Revered, it liberates. When you practice Kriya, you do not simply sit and breathe, you enter the temple of the living God within your very being. With every measured movement of life force, you silently bow at the altar of the inner Christ. You disengage the pranic currents from the sense-bound body and lift them, like a priest offering the sacred flame, to the spiritual eye, the single eye Jesus spoke of when he said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." That light, beloved, is not symbolic. It is real. I have seen it, felt it, bathed in it. It is the law of divine remembrance set into motion. You are not praying for something to happen. You are reactivating what has always been. And so I say again, Kriya is not a belief, it is a law. Just as gravity binds the planets in their course, this spiritual law draws the soul back through the luminous spinal highway, erasing karma, silencing restlessness, and ushering you into the stillness where God lives. Once the breath is calmed, the heart slows. When the breath and heart are stilled, the mind becomes a mirror. When the mind is clear, the soul begins to shine through. And when the soul touches spirit, even for a moment, 1,000,000 years of forgetfulness dissolve like mist before the rising sun. This law, long buried, has now been given again not to a chosen few, but to every child of God who thirsts for truth. It does not demand your allegiance, it invites your remembrance. The inner altar is lit, the gate stands open, and through the sacred science of Kriya, the long-lost law of the soul's return begins to breathe again in you. Shall we now go deeper into how this law dissolves karma, instills the storm of the world within you? Shall I speak of what it does not in theory, but in the temple of your living breath? Let us walk onward, into the chamber of divine stillness where the soul, long exiled, begins to come home. There is a sacred law buried not in stone nor scripture, but etched into the very breath of your being. It does not command with thunderous decree, nor does it threaten with wrath. It simply waits, silent and changeless, ready to return you to God the moment you remember how to cooperate with it. This law is the science of Kriya Yoga, not a technique, not a ritual, but a direct divine mechanism through which the restless breath and vagrant life force are drawn back into their source just as rivers, having wandered, return to the sea. What this law accomplishes is not metaphysical theory, but a direct intervention upon the architecture of human bondage. It dissolves karma. Not metaphorically, but vibrationally. By stilling the breath, the storm of restlessness is calmed. By rerouting prana through the deep spine, the soul's invisible shackles begin to loosen. Yogananda teaches that Kriya Yoga is the airplane route to God, because it bypasses the long terrain of dogma and discipline, flying straight to the divine engine of transformation hidden in the body's energy centers. When the law is activated through devotion, right posture, and conscious breath, something almost unthinkable begins to occur. Restlessness, that endless tide of desires, comparisons, fears, hungers, and obsessions, which has held the human mind hostage for countless incarnations, begins to recede. A divine stillness replaces it. Not the stillness of death or numbness, but the stillness of eternal life. A vibrant, awake, intelligent silence where the soul feels no need to chase, prove, or react. The breath becomes gentle, the heartbeat slows, and the brain, long cluttered with chaos, becomes a sanctuary of light. In this stillness, you are not merely calm, you are remembered. You are known again as spirit. And so this law accomplishes something greater still. It lifts man from the domain of ego into the sunlight of soul, awareness. You are no longer the one doing the breathing, the one thinking, reacting, remembering. You become the witness. You become the presence behind the pulse, the eye behind the seeing, the light behind the image. Ego, like a shadow mistaken for substance, begins to fade in the presence of true self-recognition. Yogananda often described this sacred reversal as the soul turning its gaze inward, away from the senses, toward the divine. It is not death, but resurrection. It is not transcendence as escape, it is transcendence as reunion. For this law, once obeyed, does not demand from you effort, it allows you to become effortlessness itself. And just as light, though composed of countless frequencies, bends itself to divine law informing the rainbow, so too does your soul, with all its complexities and karmic vibrations, begin to reflect God's image in perfect, radiant symmetry. The moment you begin to live in obedience to this spiritual law, not by will, but by inner alignment, you no longer ask for peace, you radiate it. You no longer chase love, you become it. And you no longer fear death, because you have already returned to the deathless origin of your own being. For centuries, the great spiritual law, the divine science by which the soul returns to its creator, was hidden from the eyes of the world. Not lost, not destroyed, but guarded. Guarded by luminous beings who did not seek acclaim, but who moved through the centuries as silent stars, guiding humanity through its dark night of materialism and forgetfulness. These were not mythic figures, but realized saints, keepers of a sacred trust. Among them was Mahavatar Babaji, that deathless yogi of the Himalayas whose body defies the law of decay, whose consciousness breathes in the silence behind all life. It was Babaji who, in the year 1861, beheld with sorrow the suffering of souls trapped in restlessness and ego dream, and made a divine decision that would alter the trajectory of the age. He called Lahiri Mahasaya to Himan, ordinary man outwardly, but inwardly, a liberated master, and re-gifted him with the sacred technique of Kriya Yoga, not as a new invention, but as a resumption of an ancient lineage that had lain dormant during the descending yugas of forgetfulness. Babaji knew humanity was not yet ready for mass awakening. He instructed Lahiri Mahasaya to teach only those who were inwardly prepared, those who had ripened through devotion and inner longing. Thus began the covenant, not one signed with ink, but sealed in divine vibration, that this spiritual law would be kept veiled from the masses until humanity had again climbed high enough in consciousness to understand it, respect it, and not distort it for egoic gain. Lahiri Mahasaya did not advertise. He did not preach. He waited silently, drawing the receptive and the sincere by the magnetism of his realization. Among his foremost disciples was Sri Yukteswar, the sage mathematician who united East and West in his vision of cyclical time and divine law. And it was he who, fulfilling Babaji's instructions, prepared the one soul destined to unveil the secret more fully, Paramahansa Yogananda. The law was not forgotten because of cruelty. It was hidden in compassion. Like a mother keeping fire from the hands of a child, the masters of the ages understood the power of Kriya, how it could lift a soul to cosmic heights, or be misused if handed too soon. And so they waited, loved, and protected it until a day would come, long foreseen, when souls all over the world would awaken with a hunger not for creed, but for direct contact with God. That day is now. What you have searched for in lifetimes past, what your soul has cried for in secret, someone preserved in love, in silence, in radiant protection, and now it finds you. Not because you are lucky, but because you are ready. The law was not lost. It was preparing for your arrival. Religion, in its outer shell, has always feared the inward revolution that threatens to dissolve its control. This divine law, this sacred science of Kriya Yoga is not a doctrine, not a ritual, not a creed. It is a living highway that leads man inward, away from the intermediaries of priestcraft, and into the sanctuary of his own spine, his own breath, his own God-given altar of silence. Why does religion fear this law? Because it returns power to where it was always meant to be, not in temples of stone, but in the cathedral of the soul. When man communes with spirit directly, when he learns to still the breath and dissolve the mental waves, the need for external ritual collapses. The dogma becomes dust. The pageantry fades. No longer bound by the chain of belief, man steps into the blazing certainty of experience. Kriya does not ask for your faith in a system, it gives you the system to discover the faith that lives beyond belief. It is not that religion is evil, it is that religion, when misused, becomes afraid of irrelevance. When the inner kingdom is reawakened, the outer scaffolding must fall away. The law of Kriya, revealed again through the great line of masters from Babaji to Lahiri Mahasaya to Sri Yukteswar and finally to me, breaks that chain gently but irrevocably. This is why I faced resistance when I came to the West. This is why I was called a heretic in religious circles. Because I did not bring a new dogma, I brought an ancient key. And keys, my child, unlock doors that some institutions wish would stay sealed forever. They said, stay in your country, we do not need another religion. But I had not come to give them another religion. I had come to show them the law behind all religions. I stood in pulpits and parlors, in lecture halls and courtrooms, not to argue, but to declare, that which you are seeking in ritual, in symbol, in the voice of another, can be found in your own stillness. And that law hidden for 20 years, yet blazing like a sun behind clouds, was Kriya Yoga, the divine science of breath, stillness, and God union. It is feared not because it is false, but because it is too true. It is not resisted because it is weak, but because it is too powerful for those who have grown comfortable with spiritual dependency. The narrow path Christ spoke of was not a narrow belief, it was a narrow current in the spine, through which the soul climbs to its source. Kriya Yoga is that path, and the law behind it is as precise as gravity, as universal as light. Religion feared this law because it makes every man a prophet, every woman a seer, every heart a throne of the infinite. And once you touch it, you will never again look to the outer world for your salvation. You will know the truth. And the truth, dear one, will not only set you free, will dissolve the very idea that you were ever bound. What you call breath, I call the divine tether between soul and body. It is the invisible leash that ties the infinite to the finite, the spirit to the flesh. You believe you breathe to survive, but I tell you, breath is the rhythm of karma, the vehicle of memory, the silent recorder of your past actions. As long as you breathe unconsciously, you are bound. But once you learn to govern breath, you begin to govern destiny. In the sacred science of Kriya Yoga, the breath is no longer the master, it becomes the obedient servant of soul awakening. What is karma but energy in motion, vibrating through your subtle spine, recorded in the memory banks of prana? These impressions travel up and down the astral spine like magnetic grooves carved into a celestial wire. Each thought, each action, each craving leaves a ripple that echoes through your breath. As long as your breath rises and falls with emotion, restlessness, desire, and fear, so too does the karma that animates your delusion. But the science of Kriya is, I said science, for it is no mere ritual or belief, is the mathematics of the infinite. It is not a guess. It is not even a faith. It is a divine equation, revealed to the masters who saw not through logic but through soul sight. As you direct the life energy up and down the spine with calm will and sacred breath, you begin to erase those impressions. You neutralize the karmic seeds stored in the astral cerebrospinal centers. The yogi saw that breath and mind are like twin horses pulling the chariot of the soul. Calm one, and the other becomes still. Still both, and you step off the wheel of motion into the silence of God. The law I speak of is hidden like gravity. Can you see gravity? Can you grasp it in your hands? And yet every leaf falls because of it. So too, every soul is drawn inward by the divine gravity of God, but only when the law is consciously activated. When your breath is stilled, your prana reversed, and your spine sanctified as the altar of communion, then this unseen law begins to pull you homeward. The sacred current reverses. You are no longer pushed outward by desire, but drawn inward by love. Kriya is not superstition, it is cooperation with the eternal laws of the soul's return. It severs the binding cord of breath. It unknots the rope of karma. It reveals the kingdom within, not by promise but by spiritual physics. And that, my beloved, is why this law is not hidden from you any longer. It is operating within you even now. But when awakened, it does not merely operate, it liberates. The wise men of old, those rishis and prophets who lived in deep communion with the infinite, never wrote scriptures for intellectual debate but as maps to the soul's awakening. Yet, over time, the true coordinates to divine realization have been blurred by theological fog and institutional translation. And so I ask you, beloved soul, has the Bible truly been lost to you? Or has the truth it carried simply been hidden, locked not in secrecy, but in symbols, awaiting your own awakening eye to decode it? When Jesus said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light," he did not speak in riddles, but revealed in plain words the science of divine perception. The single eye is not of the flesh, but of spirit. It is the spiritual eye, the kutastha center between the eyebrows, through which the devotee enters into divine light, into the starry tunnel that leads to God. That Christ utterance is not metaphorical mysticism, it is yogic anatomy. I too have knelt before Christ in the inner temple and heard his voice as a presence within stillness. What he whispered was not dogma, but silence, silence so full, so luminous, that it drew me inward beyond all churches, all creeds, into the cathedral of the soul. Jesus taught not religion but realization. The kingdom of God is within you, not in synagogues or rituals, but in deep, interior stillness. Be still and know. What is this stillness but the dissolution of breath? What is this knowing but the light of the Christ consciousness, shining within the calm and breathless spine? The lost law of Kriya Yoga is not a novelty, is the original practice behind the teachings of the Christ. This is not a claim made in arrogance, but in divine remembrance. Christ never sought to build a religion. He came to restore man's forgotten unity with God. And the method he used, withdrawal of life current from the senses, control of prana through breath, and lifting of consciousness into the inner light, is identical with the science of Kriya. When thou prayest, enter thy closet, not the closet of wood and brick, but the inner chamber of silence. Shut the door of the senses. and there, in secret, commune with the Father. That is yoga. That is the law. Many sincere Christians suffer beneath an inherited guilt, believing themselves to be sinners by nature. But I say, do not accept that burden. Christ did not come to declare you damned, he came to reveal your divine origin. His crucifixion was not to purchase your worth with blood, but to show you how to crucify ego, breath, and restlessness. He said, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." That is not a metaphor, it is a mandate of destiny. He would not command what is impossible. You are not meant to merely worship the Christ, but to awaken the Christ within you. Beloved, this law was not hidden by Christ. It was hidden by men who did not understand him. But the time has come. The Comforter, the inner vibration of AUM, the Holy Ghost is stirring again in the hearts of men. And through the practice of Kriya Yoga, that law of the soul, buried for 2,000 years beneath ritual and forgetting, now rises again like a phoenix from the ashes of misinterpretation. The truth has never died. It waits only for you to be still and know. Ah, beloved soul, how many years have you tried to climb the invisible mountain by merely rearranging the stones at your feet? You've whispered affirmations in the dark, lit candles in trembling hope, marched in circles of motivation and discipline, and yet the summit has not drawn nearer. Why? Because no outer ritual, however sincere, can sever the deepest root of bondage, the breath. The soul is not tethered to karma by thought alone. It is anchored in the rhythm of prana, the sacred life current that flows through your spine. Until that current is reversed, no effort, no devotion, no belief will lift you into the light. It is like trying to set sail while leaving the anchor buried in the seabed. The winds of faith may be strong, the sails of practice may be wide, but you remain fixed in place, wondering why the horizon never comes closer. It is not failure, it is misdirection. Affirmations are sacred. They are prayers dressed in syllables. But without stillness, without the inward withdrawal of life force through pranayama or kriya, they remain whispers on the surface of the lake, never reaching the pearl at the bottom. Rituals, too, are not to be condemned. They hold memory, devotion, rhythm. But if they are done while the breath runs wild, if the spine remains untouched by divine current, then they are as incense burnt outside the temple walls. Motivation? Ah, it is a spark, but not the sun. It may ignite temporary action, but it cannot dissolve the subconscious burdens of many lives. You must go deeper, beyond effort, into surrender. The soul moves not by striving, but by reuniting with its divine breath. This is why I revealed the law of Kriya Yoga not as a belief, but as a divine shortcut for souls ready to fly. One Kriya, practiced with reverence, has the power to dissolve years of mental turmoil, because it strikes the root, the very breath pattern that keeps the soul chained to body consciousness. Many have come to me, weary of years of effort, and found that in silent Kriya, their burdens began to vanish. A mother wrote me once, saying, "All the therapy, the books, the talks known could lift the grief of losing my son. But the first time I practiced Kriya in stillness, I felt him not gone, but bathed in light. I knew he lived, and so did I." Another seeker said, "I meditated for years without direction. But when I began Kriya, the light in the spiritual eye came like dawn through closed eyelids. And I wept not from sadness, but from homecoming." The law is not an idea, it is a vibration. And when you harmonize your life force with the divine river flowing through the spine, you do not merely believe in freedom, you begin to feel it. Your fears fade, not because you conquer them, but because they can no longer breathe in the rarefied air of your soul's altitude. Your habits weaken, not by war, but because the light has grown too strong for shadows to remain. So now I say unto you, stop polishing the boat, pull up the anchor, direct the breath inward. Let the divine tide of the hidden law carry you home. You do not need to be a saint to approach the altar of the infinite. You do not need robes, rituals, or a lineage of outward purity. You only need sincerity, a heart that longs for God more than for breath, and the courage to turn within. The soul, weary from the deserts of doubt and centuries of forgetting, need only whisper a single word of devotion, and the whole universe begins to bend in your direction. For the divine law we speak of the sacred Kriya Yoga, the eternal bridge between breath and spiritus, not a possession of the few, but a gift given for the upliftment of all. It is not a ladder only for those born holy, but a path made holy by those who walk it in truth. The masters never reserved it for the elite, they reserved it for the ready. Mahavatar Babaji, the deathless master who lives beyond the bounds of time in the Himalayan stillness, once declared with divine simplicity, "The divine union through Kriya Yoga will spread to all lands, and those who practice it with sincerity and faith shall be guided by me, whether I appear to them visibly or invisibly." This is not fantasy, it is cosmic promise. And like all true promises given from the divine realm, it cannot be broken. For what God has sealed in spirit, no man can unseal by opinion or doubt. If your heart has ever cried in silence, "I want God," then Babaji has already heard you. If you have ever felt a strange pull to go within, to breathe differently, to listen not with the ears but with the soul's stillness, then the law is already working on you. You have been found. This law is not made of doctrine. It is not sealed in dogma. It is composed of love, precision, and grace. Love for it was given out of compassion by the masters who suffered for the sleeping masses. Precision for it operates not by superstition, but by the exact mathematics of prana, karma, and consciousness. And grace for no soul can awaken through will alone. God meets you in each breath, in each still moment, in each cry for truth. That is the mystery of this sacred law. It answers longing more than learning. It moves faster toward humility than toward pride. You do not need to understand all the mechanics before you begin. You do not need to feel worthy. You only need to begin. For this law has not remained hidden. It has not eluded you. It has been calling you in dreams, in whispers, in the tears that fall when you see a saint's picture, in the restlessness that no worldly thing can ease. It is not you who found this truth. This truth has found you. And now that it has, there is no going back to forgetfulness. You may walk away for a time, but the light will return. The breath will tug. The memory will awaken. The masters do not forget those who once turned their face toward God. They remember, and they wait. So now the invitation is spoken not from the tongue of a man, but from the heart of eternity. Come, O soul, come into the sacred silence. Come to the breathless communion. Come to the divine stillness where all your questions melt in God's embrace. You are not alone. You are not lost. You are not unworthy. You are the one this law was given to reach. Welcome home.